Hello, and welcome to everyone. My name is Bill Stringfellow, and I'm NCBA CLUSA's Chief of Party for REGIS-ER, which will end on March 31 after 7+ years of implementation. I'm based in Niamey. Today's webinar on local conventions is the third in a series of 4 webinars organized by NCBA CLUSA in close collaboration with USAID and the Sahel Collaboration and Communication Activity. The purpose of the webinars is to mark the close of the project by addressing some key resilience issues and lessons learned during REGIS-ER. As a reminder, REGIS-ER is part of a USAID initiative, Resilience in the Sahel Enhanced, RISE, which addresses the root causes of persistent vulnerability in Niger and Burkina Faso, with the aim of breaking the cycle of recurrent humanitarian crises. Today's program is as follows. Our moderator will introduce today's topic and our 3 panelists. They will make presentations, which will be followed by a panel discussion guided by our moderator, and then by an audience question and answer session. And here's some basic information about today's webinar. Please click on the interpretation button on the bottom right of the Zoom window to listen to the simultaneous French translation. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes. Your microphones and cameras are deactivated. Please type your questions or comments in the Q&A box. I would like now to give the floor to our moderator, Mr. André Merchant.
Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. Excellent. Okay. It's lovely to be with you today. I'm coming to you from the USAID Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, where I'm a senior resilience advisor. I'm really delighted to be here introducing both the panelists and this particular topic. I was part of the original team that designed the REGIS-ER activity, as well as the entire RISE program, starting in 2012. To see this particular activity, as well as RISE, move from RISE 1 into RISE 2 with TEROV and Sahel Collaboration and Communication. This is really special for me, and I think it reflects our longstanding investments in these areas. And this particular webinar will focus today on some issues that are of particular interest to us, specifically natural resource management, environmental management in the Sahel, local governance, as well as conflict management and mitigations, which are issues of longstanding interest to USAID and things that we have invested in over multiple generations of programming. And I think today's discussion will allow us to get more technical detail into a particular set of practices that I think are very interesting and very promising and have application not just in Niger and Burkina, but more widely in the Sahel and across a number of the other dryland environments where USAID is working on building resilience to recurrent crisis. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have some excellent panelists for today. First of all, Amat Diop. He's the Deputy Chief of Party for REGIS-ER and has done that since the beginning. And he has also worked on a number of other CLUSA activities over time, including the Wula Nafa activity in Senegal, which is part of the inspiration for the local conventions under REGIS-ER. Second, I want to welcome Brooke Johnson. He's got 30 years of experience in international development and forestry, agriculture, and forest product valuation. He's been with CLUSA for a number of years, and he's an independent consultant now, and he carried out the evaluation of the REGIS-ER local conventions, which, if you have a chance to read it, I highly recommend it. It provides a lot of detail as to what makes these conventions successful from a programming perspective. And then finally, I want to welcome Dr. Amadou Sayo. Dr. Amadou Sayo is a technical advisor and sustainable land management specialist with TEROV. which is taking on many of the land and water management activities started under REGIS-ER. And he is a veterinarian by training, but he's worked for the government of Niger, NGOs, and a freelance, and also as a consultant, and has spent a number of years of working on different activities that touch on land and water management, specifically brings expertise in the policy environment and how this relates to what the government of Niger is working on. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Amath for the first presentation. We'll go through all the presentations, and then we'll have a moderated discussion and open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Just to begin with, I would say that local conventions are not a new approach in the development field. REGIS-ER's work on building the community-led practice on natural resource management around West Africa, including Multi-Stakeholder activity in 2003-2013. That contributed to the development of a framework that USAID had in the past, nature, wealth, and power. The approach goes beyond the inventory of management plan or natural resources and incorporates participatory governance and use plans that enable communities to derive sustainable livelihoods from their natural resources. Slide. How can we define the local conventions? They are community-developed natural resource management plans that promote equitable and sustainable management resources, improve soil fertility, and reduce conflicts between user groups in the communities that have adopted them. What is local convention covering? Farmland, pastures, water resource, such as ponds, and woodland, including non-timber products. Slide. And then the local conventions have 5 specific objectives, and that contribute to regulate in a consensual manner access to land use and also to community resource, include citizens in the sustainable management of their own natural resource, ensure that all citizens get access to natural resources they need to meet their need without compromising the need of others along in the long-term viability of an environment, but also prevent conflict and reduce the degradation of the natural resources. The fifth objective is promote good governance, transparency, and accountability. These objectives have been made possible through a framework that we have in the industry, defining the main content and inputs. Indeed, local conventions, which is a set of provision, standards, and rules determining access and use to natural resources, have been built from PICOAS, which stand for Municipal Land Use and Allocation Plan, but also their community rules for management and natural resources that we have seen here. Both of these PICOAS and the RCGRN contribute to the local conventions, and let us have this definition of this of these local conventions. Slide. And then when we talked about 1 minute ago about this land use plan that is done through the local conventions. They say first that they have done by the communities. They are led by their municipalities, but also help develop it, and then they do it by themselves, just with a facilitation of the project. But all the process is led by the municipality. Slide. What are the steps that led to this local convention drawing? We have these 11 steps here. I won't get to them, but just highlight that it is an inclusive and participatory process, but also it can use, you have inside it the mapping of the resources and the stakeholders. And these stakeholders include, of course, all the people that are working that are living in the ground, but also all the activities that are there, including women, youth, and all other people that are inside the commune. But we will see that it is a process through which the commune is defining the specific rules that can be applied to manage the natural resources, but in compliance with local, I would say, national laws. And then all this is done because everyone in the community is aware of what is going on, so the communication that is done is through all the local languages that are available, and then people know what's inside it and what are they engaged for. Slide. Here we come with the approach. As you can see in this diagram, we have multiple stakeholders working together to get to this. And in the same framework, as we say that, know that REGIS-ER's overall goal was to develop a resilient system for each targeted commune. These decentralized resilient systems provide inhabitants with greater local access to nutrition, hygiene, sanitation, agriculture, and livestock, and input and extension, disaster risk management, finance, and also environmental services. All these are included inside all we have here in the subcommittees that are inside this local convention definition. They all contribute participatory to the development of the local conventions. And also, in the meantime, we have also the citizen working groups that are working in link with all this village council, but also the resource person and also the community-based solution providers that are there to make it happen. And all this make the system work together and get to very good results. So I would also mention that the local conventions are part of this larger commune resilience systems and benefit from the increased level of organizational afforded by a larger level system. In the communities where we work, we also developed some resilience plan, because at the end, we know that this ER is a resilience activity. Slide. And I would not focus along with the results. I would let our colleague, Brooke Johnson, go ahead on that. I just wanted to mention that we have 19 local conventions that have been drafted, but also 34 villages that have adopted local conventions, but also conflicts reduction plans. The other results, I would like Andre, I would turn you on to Andre, so that our colleague Brooke Johnson can develop on that. Thank you.
All right, Brooke, I think you're up.
Greetings from the Gambia. My name is Brooke Johnson. A year and a half ago, REGIS-ER gathered together a team of 3 people, including Ben Moussa Traore, Ibrahim Amani, and myself, to do an impact analysis of the of 5 conventions in Niger and Burkina Faso. The results of which are presented in a report, as Andre mentioned, that you can find at the link at the end of this presentation. Précy was also included in a collection of articles entitled Restoring African Drylands, published by the European Tropical Forest Research Network. Like I said, both should be available for viewing at the end of this presentation. Slide. I think we can move past to the next one. Yep, thank you. So we're looking at impacts here. What are the impacts of the local conventions? First of all, I wanted to give you an overview of the revenues earned at the commune level through the local convention. As Ahmet stated, there are bylaws. Those bylaws can allow the commune to determine taxes, fees, and fines, and generate revenues. As you can see, the amounts generated are relatively modest for the most part. In Tonikanja is $170 over four and a half years, Drum $400 over 4 years. Ginan Rumji was just $81 and Mani was $170. The striking, the commune that had a real benefit was Burum, and we'll talk about that briefly later. The reasons for these relatively low levels is that decentralization of local taxes, fines, and fees is somewhat controversial. Previously, it was generated by the state. Communes do have certain rights to impose these fees, fines, and taxes, but it can be politically quite challenging to get in place. As a result, some local conventions did not even add them into their convention. So their revenues only came from their eaux et forêts, the local forest department's returns, which was 10% of any infraction. And that explains the modest amounts. The resource base has a lower income potential in these Sahelian zones than many of the Sudanian zones, where there are high value products. The one exception mentioned is Burum, which actually imposed some fees and fines on artisanal gold mining. So completely nothing to do with forestry or agricultural or livestock related activities, artisanal gold mining, which was somewhat controversial, but it demonstrated the will of the local mayor to collect these fees. These limited funds led to localized village-based interventions. And I should say, did not lead to a larger landscape interventions which require materials, transport costs, and maybe financial incentives for those that are monitoring them. Next slide, please. One of the things that these Regis local conventions did lead to was increased number of farmer-managed natural regeneration hectares promoted by the local convention. So you see a little bit of an overview here of the numbers, 600 in Tondekanja, 1,300 in Drum, 5,000 in Gidan Rumji. Burum had about 3,000, and Mani about 2,900. I mentioned, given the limited funds that most activities were carried out locally. So FM&R falls within this category. Local conventions are very good at formalizing traditional informal laws or guidelines. That's what happened. These bylaws then prohibited destruction of certain tree species and prevented overpolluting of agricultural species, agroforestry species, and reinforced the monitoring groups. So these local conventions were very good at monitoring FM&R. So as you can see, led to a 4.6% average increase in FM&R in these communes. And the commune of Mani achieved a 32% increase in FM&R coverage, which is very striking. Of course, it's one of the smaller communes, but still a very big increase there. Next slide, please. Here we're looking at some of the pastoral impacts. The hectares of restored pasture. Restored pasture means protecting degraded pasture land from grazing. It can mean soil conservation and reseeding. As you can see, a lot of the activities for restored pasture were carried out by partners other than REGIS-ER, and that's fine. One of the goals of resilience is that not everybody can do everything. Partners need to work together to achieve these goals. The local convention does not just reflect the activities of REGIS-ER here, and are intended to be included into the commune planning process, which will allow them to attract more government funding later on. Looking at the livestock corridors, I think we all know, or most of us should know, that livestock corridors are well established, both locally and internationally. But the problem is that the borders are often not clear. Herders can accidentally graze on a farmer's field, or a farmer can accidentally plant on the pasture, on the path. This leads to conflict. So delineating these borders can reduce conflict. In this table, we see an idea of the number of concrete borders that have been put in place in Tondi Kanja and Gidan Rumji. So a fair amount, again, multi-partner interaction here. With Burum, it was interesting, again, here they didn't actually use expensive concrete posts, but they painted the borders themselves. The local community bought their own paint and painted 70 kilometers of corridor. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. These factors all led to a reduced number of resource-based conflicts. You can see the graphs for yourselves, but the overall amount of natural resource conflicts dropped by 73.8% in 4 communes. Those are the yellow, green, orange, and blue lines. The Mani data, which is the black line, which is even more dramatic, was a little vague, so was not included in this overall average. The types of conflicts were not disaggregated, but we did do it in 1 commune. We looked at disaggregation there, and generally speaking, it seemed that the type of conflict was not particularly affected. That means that all levels of conflict reduced proportionally. This ends my panel presentation, and I will pass over back to Andre again.
Thank you, Brooke. Amadou, Abu.
Thank you, Andre. I'll try to use my video for a second, and then I'll move on, get back to the mic. I'm not sure if you see me. So this is Amadou Sayo. I'm technical advisor for, and also leading the component 2 for TER-OV. So TER-OV is one of the activities under the RISE-2 project which has been mentioned by Bill in the beginning slide. So my presentation is focusing on how TER-OV is taking over from REGIS-ER in terms of how we can help to improve natural resource management and reduce conflict. Slide. So TER-OV, just some minutes to explain what TER-OV is about. We are focusing on 3 components. One of the components is focusing on water security, and including water for multiple use. The second component is focusing on land use planning. And the third component is focusing on management of shock and risk and stresses. But the local convention, is addressed mainly through the component 2. But when we discuss about the component, the local convention, in fact, it's a tool which is really helping to address to help to improve the management of water issues, water point, because when you have, for example, for component 1, multiple users for water, then you need rules, regulation, and also reduce conflict around access to water. The same apply with the shocks, because we also address issues around watershed management. For example, how we can ensure that this is not going to increase flooding and other issues. These are some examples. So local convention is seen here like a cross-cutting tool, which can help really to address natural management across the country or across the different issues. Slide. So back to the objective of my presentation. At the beginning, we had a lot of discussion with REGIS-ER because we had the chance to have almost at least 1 year overlap with TEROV and REGIS-ER before they close. So this allows us to have a lot of discussion, workshop, meetings, sharing document, and this really led us to have a country-specific plan. So to have a really clear agenda how we're going to take over. So for example, for Niger, we agree that we're going to design together with REGIS-ER 2 local convention. So in practical way, we're going to experience the way they did it, but also help them to have a kind of backup to reflect on how it's moving forward. So we did it in Sakwara and Tilaberi, and then we also, in the meantime, in Niger, support the implementation of local convention through radio program. I'll come back to this later on when we're going to discuss the experience in Burkina Faso. But the one I'm going to focus on in Niger is how we really reflect together and try to scale up or institutionalize local convention in the country. Slide. So one of the point, really the key activities that we really we did here in Niger is to have a lot of discussion first with the rural code in Niamey, together with REGIS-ER initially, and then the rural code decided to gather different stakeholders and projects who has experience in developing local convention. So we came up with based on different experience, including the one from REGIS-ER, came up with a national guide, which has been validated through different level of consultation. So the last consultation process has been done in December. Based on this, now the government is going to make it official. So all stakeholders are supposed to use this guideline. So it's going to, the impact of it will be larger than the area where we are working. The other point is this guideline also helped to really to reduce the time of implementing or developing the local convention. The other point is that we also looking for, because the government has a guideline to develop the commune development plan. So this guideline is being revised. So with another project of funded by USAID. So we are working to ensure this some critical steps needed to are going to be included in this guideline. And so this is going to reduce the cost of developing local convention, but also the buy-in with the commune. So it's going to be upfront process to ensure that local convention is included in this process. The other point we also discussed with the rural code, one of the reasons they really appreciate this local convention guideline, because the country has, it was clear in the rule and regulation that the local convention is needed or is allowed. But there's no guideline described by the government to say how it's going to be done. But there's a guideline to develop the regional land development chain. So this regional development chain is a broad perspective how in 25 years, 20 to 25 years, any region is going to develop how they see the vision the specific the strategic objective to develop natural resources in this region. So local convention is seen here as a way to implement at local level, at community level, this regional land development scheme. Slide. So now what we've been doing is for around this local convention is based on the process which is going on with the rural court. We really, one of the key change or the point which has been strengthened is the fact that the local convention is driven by the community. So the requests are coming from the community, and based on this, the local convention has been developed. This is the case we're having with in Damagram Takaya, in Bushi, and some at least 5 communes are now send us a request, and we're working together with other stakeholders like development food security activities, Wadata, Girma, and WFP in Zender region. So at the same time, it helps us, like Brooks mentioned here earlier, that one of the key elements is the request is centered, is coming from the need to secure, protect, but also restore some resources. And both, it's not just communal resources like grazing land or forestry or degraded land, but also individual land. So this is something that we also added in the process. Slide. So in Burkina Faso, the way it's being developed, because compared to Niger, where we spend a lot of time to develop the guideline, the discussion going on with different partners show that they have a guideline developed by the Ministry of Agriculture. And then they call it, instead of calling it local convention, it's called local land charters. So the point we really spend a lot of time to agree on different steps to how to going to bring this and to translate this into this new guideline that the government of Burkina has. And it strengthened the most of the key elements that has been mentioned earlier. So the fact that the community are empowered and run local custom, but also it helps us to really focus on water security approach and involve water agencies in the process. Slide. For example, in terms of what has been done, there's in Mani and Setanga, the process has been translated into specific local shelters around dam, grazing area, but also community forest. In Barsalogo, the process is ongoing, and also there's another process going on in Yalgo and Tuguri, which is involved DGFF Mayor, which is the Ministry of Agriculture, but also USAID funded projects like Servir, Vim Plus, and Aster. Slide. One point that is common from the two countries also is the fact that we are spending a lot of time to ensure to support the implementation of local convention or local land charters. So one of the key element is through communication, translating the rules developed at local level into different language, because most of the time the documents are in French, and then we have to reverse them in the local languages. Use local radio to popularize all this. Also popularize different tools for natural resource management. Also help the community to coach the community to develop this kind of situation. But the point is here, one point that we are also working in Niger, for example, the fact that we have some collaboration with the University of Niamey to support the community to ensure that they can reduce the cost. One, because in the community development plan, step 1 to 5 mentioned by Ahmad will be integrated in the PDC, and then we also increase the revenue because we're going to support some improvement we saw, for example, in Bande, where the community is supporting the development of farmer managed natural vegetation, like around Baobab, which is bringing a lot of revenue. This is just one example of how we can support value chain through this process. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, and then thank you to Amadou, and thank you to all of our panelists for their presentations. I want to turn over to the Q&A. We're going to start with a few questions that we have put together in advance, and then we will turn to the questions that are coming in the chat, and I see quite a few of them. I want to note, first of all, and this question will be for Amat, land use and natural resource management planning is not new in the Sahel, and I would note we have some of the premier both regional and international experts on the topic in this webinar today. I wanted to ask specifically, what do you think is particularly innovative or important about the approach that REGIS-ER took to this work?
Thank you, Andre. I will mention, let me say, 4 main things that are innovative. Compared to what was done in the past, but also even to now, there are other things that have been done not the way people find innovative. The first one is, it is a demand-driven process. And in that case, you know that the municipalities have to come to the project and then sign a MOU and also set a steering committee and go with that. It was something very innovative because the way that it was done is it was up to a consultant to go and go through all the process. The second thing is also that it was up to the steering committee at the municipality level to do all the training, but also train all the sub-zone actors, and the project and the consultant just had a facilitation role, not something else. The first thing was to me very important to show it is that it complies with local laws, and then it was once all the plan has been drawn, then it is turned over to government officials so that they can ensure it is in conformity with local government laws. And another thing which is the most important, to my opinion, is that a local action plan is drawn with activities and also forecast on what's going on. I think that these are the 4 innovations that we have brought inside the process you used to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That was excellent and really adds a little bit more to the discussion. The next question is for Amadou and Amat as well. And that is a question about gender, a question about youth, a question about inclusion. How have the local convention processes and the conventions themselves included and improved the access of women and youth to land and resources? And we know that this is a topic that's of interest to many and a long-standing challenge in this region. Maybe Amadou, you'd like to go ahead and go first.
Thank you, Andre. Just building on the last point of that Amat mentioned is in the process there's one step which is developing or establishing a steering committee. In this steering committee, there's a specific role allocated to youth, women, and pastoralists. That's one. The second element is when the rule and regulation are developed by the community and all users. So there is a kind of focus group ensuring that youth group, pastoralist group have their own say in the process. That's the second point. The third point is when the rule and regulation has been combined and aggregated at the area level, there's also a popularization process. This is our element that shows this. The last point I want to mention is that we discussed in the national guideline is that the local convention will ensure increase because of the land use map showing that most of the land is degrading, and also most of it is going to agricultural, and so there's a lot of resources deteriorating in terms of resources. So there's the issue that sensitizing women, youth, and other stakeholders to secure their own individual land, including women and youth. This is what I can say about this.
Sorry.
Thank you. What I would add is two other things. I thank you, Amadou, for having done all this. I would add that in REGIS-ER, we have developed some groups, like the mother-to-mother groups, but also that all this SECA, it is for microfinance, but village level saving and loans groups, but also all these conservation farming groups. Most of the groups are mainly composed by women, which was very important for us. But also, when we talk about also the Havana groups, there are mainly women and youth that are inside. And all these have been, all these groups are fully involved in this process through this focus groups and also all this, what is going on this local convention process. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another question. And Brooke, we're going to send this your way first and foremost. How do you see local conventions influencing larger scale land use management policies and practices like farmer managed natural regeneration? I know you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. I guess the question for people who've been following the Sahel for a long time is, how do you see local conventions having an impact on large-scale environmental challenges like soil degradation?
Thanks, Andre. Well, as I mentioned, the capacity of the local conventions so far to generate revenues has limited their capacity to more or less the village areas, and not so much at the larger ecosystem levels, such as forests, pastures, and so forth. Having said that, I will focus on the word scaling up. I'll start with FMNR. In Scaling Up Regreening by Chris Ray and Bob Winterbottom, they note 6 steps to promoting FMNR, and I will do a précis. I analyze existing successes, build and mobilize partner organizations, address policy and legal issues and improve enabling conditions, implement a communication strategy, strengthen agroforestry value chains, and expand research activities. The REGIS local conventions are doing 3 of those. They're creating an organizational structure to encourage and monitor FMNR, step 2. They clarify the legal issues for ratification of local bylaws that encourage FMNR and prevent inappropriate thinning, that's step 2. And REGIS-ER, in partnership with Municipal Council, established a very comprehensive campaign to disseminating bylaws and associated management practices. That's step 4. So 3 of these 6 steps have been facilitated by local conventions. As the document Scaling Up Regreening said, technically FMNR is not terribly complicated, but the challenges lie in building village institutions to manage the new tree capital and enforce locally defined bylaws. And that's exactly what local conventions are doing. So in terms of scaling up FMNR, local conventions are a great tool. As to soil conservation, I don't have tons to say. A lot of the soil conservation activities that were carried out in the zones that we studied, at least, were carried out by partner organizations. Obviously, the local conventions provided a framework to do that and enabled that process, but were less directly impacting the soil conservation activities. I wondered if Amadou wanted to say something more, since I know they were working a little bit more on watershed management side of things about soil conservation.
Amadou?
Thank you, Andre and group. Maybe the only point that I'm saying that we, for example, in Walam, just the example of Walam, where we working with World Vision to help the community to have specific objectives in terms of promoting the adoption of technology. Because most of the time, what's being done is we let the process go on. But here, what we want to promote is to ensure that community will set the objectives and use the local convention to protect, also to use, also to take the advantage of this local convention to get the more benefit or it. So getting broader objectives, but also have individual benefit from this. This is one of the process we want to we're supporting with actually with World Vision in Walam.
Thank you, Amadou. Brooke, we wanted to send another question your way. And just to note, there are a lot of concerns about the growth of conflict in Sahelian countries in recent years, and certainly Burkina Faso has been very much on the front lines of that, and Niger has its own security concerns. The question for you is, how do you see local conventions addressing both local and larger scale conflict dynamics, and including herder-farmer tensions, and these things are in the news on a regular basis. So we appreciate your thoughts on that.
Well, at a local level, I think REGIS-ER local conventions are very effective at addressing conflict issues. We've seen a reduction of 73.8% in these 5 communes, which is stunning. Mostly this comes about through the formalization of traditional rules through bylaws, restoration of pastures, as I mentioned, and delineation of livestock paths. So at that level, at the very local village level, I think local conventions serve an effective use of conflict reduction. In the course of my research, I stumbled across an article by Higazi and Abubakar, Pastoralism and Security in West Africa and Sahel Towards Peaceful Coexistence, and they even call attention to the local conventions in Burkina Faso and Niger, saying all this is helping to promote conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution, ensuring that farmland and pasture land are both protected. At a larger scale level larger than the commune level, the impact of conflict reduction is more difficult to measure. However, the mayor of Tony Kanja did mention that local conventions facilitated dialogue with national pastoralist unions, which is important to reduce conflict. But looking at the drivers of pastoralist related conflicts, they're numerous and complex, and include demographics, increased use of arms, violent extremism, national politics. While local conventions clearly promote conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution at local level, I think there are some limits as to how they can address militarized conflict. That's it for me, Andre.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. That's excellent. Sorry, thank you, Brooke. That's excellent. That helps us. It's a very interesting answer. I want to go to the last question and then we will get to the questions from the chat. And this question is for Amadou. One of the things that we're obviously paying more attention to, at least at the political level here in the United States, but of course is a fact of life in the Sahel, is climate change. And I wanted to ask, how do local conventions help communities adapt to both the inherent climate variability of the Sahel, which many of the people on this call know very well as the longer term climate change trends like increasing temperatures, as well as more variable rainfall and the dispersion of that rainfall over time, especially in large scale events. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. This is one of the really maybe the advantage of having a local convention, because of it's also one of the reasons. For example, the national guideline is called not only designing local version but also implementing it. As I mentioned earlier, this is a great tool to protect, secure, and also restore natural resources. In some way, for example, it's going to, we talk about farmer managed natural regeneration. So it's going to have support the regreening process, which is have impact on carbon. The second point is in watershed management, to also decrease mitigate or prevent some flooding issues. These are kind of point, but also this kind of land degradation activities, when really designed explicitly to improve water infiltration and underground waters, recharge, then it's going to be something very critical to improve long-term adaptation capacity at community level. So these are some examples that we have that we can use it. And also, like I mentioned, we can use it in terms of to managing conflict or access to water, which is critical in the Sahel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amadou. That's really interesting. And I know also that TerraV is working with other organizations on groundwater mapping, which also gives a sense of where those resources might be available to help manage water needs. I want to turn a little bit to the questions from the chat, and we are getting all sorts of questions here, lots of good ones. Let me start with first one, and this one probably is best addressed to Amat or to Brooke. The question is, might there be incentives to circumvent the local conventions to avoid paying taxes, fines, or fees? Perhaps that explains the relatively low revenues. Does the research show that the incidence of resource users paying bribes to monitors to avoid paying higher user fees? I think the question is generally about tax avoidance or fee avoidance related to the local conventions, which is a well-known issue in many areas in terms of people perhaps not wanting to hand their money over to Ose Foray. So I'm curious as to how you see that issue. And maybe Brooke, you want to start with that.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly.
From your study.
Local communities did call attention to the fact that they were reluctant to fine one another and reduce social capital at the local level. So that was definitely a disincentive. But generally speaking, I would say the main issue was that these fines, taxes, and fees were not written into the local conventions explicitly, because it was a somewhat politically charged issue. Because they weren't in there, then they couldn't come into effect. And so the only source of revenue that communes were getting was money from the tax returns from the forestry department. So it's mostly a case of explicitly putting those fines, fees, and taxes in the conventions. And then, second of all, some did, there were 2 or 3 that did do this, enforcing them. And that was the second problem, because the groups had little revenue, then they couldn't gather more revenue. So I think those are the main 2 causes of that problem, not so much the social or bribery issues.
Thank you. Amat, do you want to add anything to that? If not, that's okay.
So I'm here. So
yes,
just wanted to add just something for the fines that are included in this bylaws, and that helped also collect money when people are behaving in a bad way, and then this also helps collect some money in order to pay people that are taking care of the respect of the rules that have been set in the forest. Okay, and then these watchmen are also used to see what was going on, and then have some a part of repayment of when fines are collected. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. The next question is for Amadou. And Amadou, it says, based on the work that Terre OV and REGIS-ER did to harmonize the local conventions with the rural code, the Code Rural, do the communes and or the commissions now have the legal authority or jurisdiction to enforce the local conventions, or is compliance and enforcement voluntary? So I think the question here is about kind of who has jurisdiction to enforce this, and how much of it is compliance versus voluntarily driven.
Thank you, Andre. So, I mean, in terms of responsibilities, the commune has already some what they call it the transfer of competencies in terms of managing natural resources. The point is they don't have the capacity to ensure that it's done in a proper way, in a sustainable way at local level. So the local convention, as it's being done, gave the possibility for the commune to have an agreement with the community on the ground to manage specific resources and based on specific term of reference. So the second point we have it in the new guideline. It's mentioned that after 2 or 3 years, it's not there's kind of incentive for a commune to revise this local convention, so that if there's issue around inclusion or issue around saying that certain rule developed are not really effective or not so suitable, then they can adapt it over time. So this is kind of the instrument that allows the commune and the community to have a dialogue to agree on how to going to manage at the level, because they don't have the capacity to do it and close to the resource. That's the community who are very close to the resource. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I see that we are getting close to time, and I want to leave just a minute for Bill to wrap things up. I will note that CLUSA is writing down all these questions. We've got all these questions captured, and I think as part of the follow-up, there will be an effort to share the documents that were mentioned today during the discussion, as well as some answers to your many questions. So I hope this was a useful discussion for you. I know I learned a lot, and I really want to thank our panelists and CLUSA and SCC and Terre OV for making this possible. And I'm going to turn it back over to Bill to do the final wrap up for us.
Thank you, Andre. As everyone knows, we were not able to answer everyone's question today, but we have captured your questions, and we will get back to you with responses to your unanswered questions. In the chat section of this webinar, you may have seen the links to the English and French versions of the technical brief about REGIS-ER's approach to local conventions. We will also send you a follow-up email with those same links and the links to Brooke's case study on REGIS-ER's local conventions and to the recording of this webinar. I would like to thank our moderator, Andre Merchant, and our 3 panelists, Amat Diop, Brooke Johnson, and Dr. Amadou Sayo, for their participation in today's webinar. I think that everyone will agree that this webinar has been an interesting examination of local conventions. I hope that you can all attend our final webinar on March 25. The topic is citizen working groups, and the webinar will be conducted in French with an English translation. Until then, goodbye and take care.